During the American Civil War, the United States almost faced war with two world powers, Britain and France. The Confederacy, made up of 11 southern states that broke away from the Union in 1861, depended heavily on exporting cotton to Europe. When the war began, the Union Navy blocked southern ports, cutting off most trade in or out. This was disastrous for the South. Confederate leaders believed that if powerful nations like Britain and France recognized them as an independent country, those nations might force the Union to end its blockade. That would reopen the cotton trade, bring in weapons and supplies, and put pressure on the U.S. government to stop the war. Britain and France officially stayed neutral, but they did recognize the Confederacy as a belligerent, which meant it was treated like a country at war under international law. Napoleon III of France wanted Britain to join him in officially recognizing the South. President Abraham Lincoln warned that this would be seen as a declaration of war against the United States. Britain refused. Even though Prime Minister Lord Palmerston personally supported the South, he knew that helping it could endanger British ships and risk a U.S. invasion of Canada, which belonged to Britain at the time. Tensions peaked later that year during the Trent Affair, when a Union ship stopped a British vessel and captured two Confederate diplomats on board. Britain reacted angrily, sending troops to Canada and preparing for war. But the crisis was solved peacefully through diplomacy. By 1862, Britain's textile industry was suffering from a lack of cotton due to the blockade, but intervention still seemed too risky. France was more willing to help because of Napoleon III's interests in Mexico, but he wouldn't act without Britain. By 1864, after Confederate defeats and rising tensions in Europe, Napoleon dropped the idea. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Imperial Germany secretly developed several invasion plans for the United States. Between 1897 and 1903, officers in the German Navy created detailed proposals for how an attack might happen. Germany wanted to weaken the U.S., stop its growing influence in the Pacific, the Caribbean, and South America, and open the way for its own colonial expansion. The first plan, written in 1897 by Lieutenant Eberhard von Mantet, focused on destroying the American Navy on the East Coast. He proposed sending a German fleet across the Atlantic to defeat the U.S. Navy and destroy shipyards in Hampton Roads, Virginia, which he called the most sensitive point in America's defenses. He believed that losing this area would force the U.S. to negotiate. However, after the U.S. victory in the Spanish-American War in 1898, Germany had to rethink. With Puerto Rico under U.S. control and Cuba under strong American influence, Germany had no good base in the Caribbean. So, in 1899, von Mantet came up with a new plan, a direct invasion of New York City and Boston. A fleet of 60 warships and dozens of transport ships would carry 100,000 soldiers across the Atlantic. They would land at Cape Cod to attack Boston, and at Sandy Hook to move on New York. German warships would destroy harbor defenses and bomb Manhattan to cause panic. But General Alfred von Schlieffen warned that 100,000 troops might take Boston, but not New York, which already had over 3 million people. Germany didn't have enough transport ships to carry the larger army needed. In 1900, Kaiser Wilhelm II suggested launching the invasion from Cuba instead of Germany. But that meant Germany would have to conquer Cuba first. In 1901, Lieutenant Hubert von Reber-Paschwitz secretly traveled to scout Cape Cod as a landing site. He found it unsuitable and recommended moving to Manamet Point, where German warships could provide artillery support. He also suggested a second landing at Cape Ann, north of Boston, using intelligence from a U.S. defense report he had obtained. Again, Schlieffen doubted the plan, warning that the U.S. already knew about its coastal weaknesses and could prepare defenses in time. Naval officer Wilhelm von Buchsel proposed another idea, building a German base in Culebra, Puerto Rico, to threaten the Panama Canal. But by then, times had changed. The U.S. Navy was growing fast after its victory over Spain. Britain's navy was also expanding, while Germany was falling behind in the naval arms race. In 1904, Britain and France signed the Entente Cordiale, making a European war more likely than an attack on America. By 1906, Germany abandoned all invasion plans. They stayed secret until 1970, when historian Holger Herwig found them in the German military archives in Freiburg. The Zimmermann telegram. In January 1917, during World War I, Germany sent a secret coded message that could have brought war to North America. The telegram was sent by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to Germany's ambassador in Mexico. Germany was preparing to restart unrestricted submarine warfare, even though it knew this could bring the U.S. into the war. Zimmermann instructed his ambassador that if war with the U.S. became certain, he should propose a military alliance with Mexico. Germany promised financial support and said Mexico could take back Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, territories it had lost in the 1800s. The goal was to force the U.S. to fight Mexico, slowing down American help to Britain and France, and giving Germany more time to win in Europe. British codebreakers in Room 40 intercepted and decrypted the telegram, thanks to earlier captures of German codebooks. But Britain couldn't reveal it easily. Showing the message would tell Germany that British intelligence was reading its codes. To protect their secret, they got another copy from the Mexican Telegraph Office and claimed that was their source. They then gave the telegram to the U.S. government. At first, President Woodrow Wilson was cautious. Many Americans thought it might be a fake message made by Britain to push the U.S. into war. But that changed when Zimmermann himself admitted that the message was real. Meanwhile, German submarines had already sunk several American ships, angering the public even more. Soon after, the U.S. declared war on Germany. Mexico rejected the offer. President Venustiano Carranza asked his generals to study it. They concluded Mexico couldn't win such a war. The country was in the middle of a civil conflict. Its military was weak, and even if it regained the territories, it couldn't control the mostly English-speaking populations living there. German financial support was also uncertain, and attacking the U.S. would harm Mexico's relations with other Latin American nations. The America Bomber Project. In the late 1930s, Nazi Germany began planning a way to bomb the United States directly from Europe. The idea became known as the America Bomber Project. The goal was to design a long-range bomber that could fly over 7,000 miles round-trip without refueling, enough to reach and bomb New York City. The idea started in 1938, after a Focke-Wulf 200 Condor aircraft flew non-stop from Berlin to New York, proving the distance was possible. Hitler liked the idea, and Luftwaffe chief Hermann Göring complained that Germany didn't have a bomber capable of such a mission. German aircraft companies began working on designs, and Hitler even thought about using the Azores Islands, owned by Portugal, as a launch base. But by 1943, Britain had leased those islands, ending that possibility. By 1942, Germany had a plan for 3 types of bombers, each carrying around 3 to 7 tons of bombs. The targets were U.S. factories making aircraft engines, aluminum, and precision parts. German leaders hoped such attacks would force America to move its air defenses away from Britain. 2 prototypes were built, but modern research shows the stories about them reaching the U.S. coast in 1944 are false. Another idea came from scientist Eugen Sanger, the Silbervogel, or Silver Bird, a rocket-powered suborbital bomber that could strike anywhere in the world, but it never went beyond theory. In reality, the project had serious problems. Germany lacked materials and reliable engines, and Allied bombing made production even harder. Even if a bomber had reached the U.S., its small bomb load would have done little real damage. Germany also didn't have a nuclear program that could make such a mission decisive. By the end of World War II, the America bomber project was abandoned as unrealistic. Still, Sanger's concept later inspired early spaceplane designs, including ideas that led to the space shuttle. Canada's preemptive invasion plan. In 1921, Canadian officer Lieutenant Colonel James Sutherland Brown created a top-secret plan called Defense Scheme No. 1, a plan for a surprise Canadian invasion of the United States. It was designed for only one situation, if war ever broke out between the U.S. and the British Empire. The plan called for Canadian forces to strike first, moving quickly into the northern U.S. before America could fully mobilize. The goal wasn't to conquer or hold U.S. territory, but to slow American advances and buy time for Britain to send help. In the West, Canadian troops would target Seattle, Spokane, and Portland. From Winnipeg, forces would head south to capture Fargo and Great Falls, then move toward Minneapolis. From Quebec, troops would aim for Albany, while units from the Maritimes would push into Maine. After hitting these cities, the Canadians would retreat, destroying bridges and railroads to slow pursuit. Between 1921 and 1926, Brown and his officers secretly crossed the U.S. border in plain clothes to scout terrain, roads, rail lines, and river crossings. He even believed some Americans, frustrated during Prohibition, might be sympathetic to Canada. Supporters like General Perks thought the plan might work briefly, while critics called it unrealistic and suicidal. Britain had no plans to send troops, so Canada risked losing its best soldiers for little gain. In 1928, Canada's new Chief of the General Staff, Andrew McNaughton, canceled the plan to maintain peace with the U.S. Years later, it was revealed that the U.S. had its own version, War Plan Red, created in 1930, which outlined an American invasion of Canada if war ever broke out with Britain. Operation AL, Japan invades Alaska. This one actually happened, although it wasn't on the U.S. mainland. In June 1942, Japan invaded 2 remote Alaskan islands, Attu and Kiska, in an operation called Operation AL. It was the first time since the War of 1812 that part of U.S. territory was occupied by a foreign power. Japan wanted to extend its patrol area in the North Pacific, stop the U.S. from building forward air bases, and protect Japan's northern flank. On June 7, 1942, about 1,140 Japanese troops under Major Matsutoshi Hosumi landed on Attu without resistance. The island's 42 Aleut villagers and 2 Americans, Charles and Etta Jones, were captured. Charles, a radio operator, destroyed his equipment so it couldn't be used, and was executed. On May 11, 1943, U.S. forces launched a counterattack in harsh Arctic weather to retake the island. The fighting was brutal and ended on May 29th with one of the largest banzai charges of the Pacific War. Almost the entire Japanese force was killed. Only 29 soldiers surrendered. U.S. forces also suffered heavy losses, but the islands were finally retaken. This ended the Japanese occupation of U.S. soil.